Okay, so we're going to be adding some figures to this scene. And I chose this scene because so far, I mean, to date, really, we've been tackling flat ground, putting figures into even ground, flat ground. But this one, we're dealing with putting figures above our own eye line. Okay. Now, I know we've got the photo is portrait orientation. Okay. But, and you can, it's up to you on this, folks. You can choose portrait. I'm sticking with landscape because it's easier for the camera. But it really makes no difference. The only difference it will make is just that you'll need to increase the area of field on this left-hand side here, okay? And in any case, it's quite nice to have a vertical. I mean, let's face it, we have, the road is giving us a sense of vertical, okay? And that vertical, that strong vertical against the horizontal landscape orientation works quite well, I think. So, but as I say, if you want to work portrait, that's your choice entirely. So I'll show you where this eye line is. I mean, I don't know whether any of you have, tried guessing where the eye line would be. Let me just cover the drawing first. My sort of attention goes to the top of the road. Now, whatever you do, unless you've already drawn this out, don't put this in the middle of your paper. Okay, the middle of the width. I mean, width-wise, don't put it in the center. I'm going to push it off slightly to the left, not by much, but just so it's off center. Now, I'm going to bring the left-hand side edge of my road down into near this corner. They say, the rules say, dreaded rules, you should never go into a corner with with a line, with such a strong line like this. You should never have it disappear into the corner. I've done this on a few occasions, and personally, I don't think it's a massive issue, but I may be saying something different in a month's time, because that's the nature of art. The more we learn, or the more questions there are, the longer sometimes it takes to learn them. Something like that. Anyway, so I'm bringing the other side of the road out to about here on my painting. Now, on the photo, you'll notice that it goes out to the edge of your canvas there, okay? But that's because the photo is, as I say, a portrait orientation. So I think it'll suffice to bring the width of my road out to here. But what I must draw attention to here is it's just the rather acute scale, jump in scale here. So the road at the top here, what is it? An inch and a quarter wide? Whereas we've got something like 10, 11 inches wide down here. It is, believe it or not, easy sometimes for us not to open this scale up sufficiently enough. And we would bring the road down to about 4 inches wide down here. It's not going to work. You're not going to get any dynamics by doing that. Right, so just do a few sort of almost tire track marks, if you like. This view, incidentally, is only around the corner from last week's image, and my house is just, you can just see the sort of apex end of my house on here. Not that that's relevant, but just a by the by. Now, I do like this hawthorn, these row of bushes just here. It sort of demarks the area up there. It's a good way of showing off the end of the lane. I also like the telegraph post, but in the photo, the telegraph post is about here. I mean, that's okay. You could, You could certainly put that one in. If you do put the telegraph post in that's off to the left, don't have it trapped inside your paper. This isn't a piece of paper. That's the way we got to think. This is the world. This is the real thing. Well, you know, if you were looking through a window, you wouldn't shrink your telegraph post down. There is a habit, and I used to do it myself. If we put verticals that are close to us, within a couple of yards of us, like tall trees and posts, we tend to want to keep them inside the confines of the piece of paper or canvas. And our brain somehow says, you know, I don't know, it's like it's trying to tell us that this scene isn't real. It is real, and the telegraph post goes way beyond our canvas. It pops outside the edge here. So whatever you do, don't allow the brain to tell you that that's got to be, you know, confined to the paper. Make sure that your line goes right out. Now, the sweet spot is really the top of my road here. So a couple more of these, and of course, as you go up the hill, they get smaller. So you'd expect them to be within the confines of the edge of the paper, okay? Because it's a smaller measurement. So I know it sounds pretty obvious, folks. It sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but I still see sometimes where I get somebody sending in their image for crit, and I think, well, you know, it seems to be more a thing with trees. We have quite a large tree in our foreground, and we keep it within the confines of the paper, whereas it should, you know, the limbs, the upper limbs and branches and twigs of this tree live way beyond the edge. So, right, so down I come here. There's a little bit of grassy verge right at the edge, and then there's this lovely abstracty wall, a dilapidated wall with some posts in it. So scale those posts. Be careful to scale those posts. The nearer one I'm going to make larger than is actually as it's represented in the photo. The photo plays, you know, I think we've mentioned this many times in the past. Photos, the fisheye lens effect of photos will push things at the peripheral away from us a bit and make them look smaller than they actually were or are. So I tend to sort of exaggerate the scale a little bit as I do the road, as we mentioned with the road. So bit of a grassy verge on the right hand side here. There's a hedge that chases down all the way down here. It's a bit of a sort of square block, that hedge there, isn't it? So, and then it pops down here, and I'm going to make my hedge really as though it's one huge rectangle traveling along the side, parallel to the side of the road. So it would have walls to it, sides to it, like this, and that's how I often sort of indicate my my shapes. I'll put a vertical pencil line in there, telling me that that's the. It's almost like well, it's almost like a wall, a vertical wall, and it'll indicate the type of brush mark I need to make there. Okay, now then, because we've opened this up, or I've opened mine up in landscape format, I don't really, I don't have the information from my photo as to what is here in terms of buildings exactly. So I'm going to use what is there, and that's this house here. We can see a little bit of the angle of the roof there, but I think this would make a better, image if we just put it square on for the sake of this demonstration. So my tongue was saying one thing, my brain was thinking another. So I'm just going to get rid of the lines that I don't want to use there. Just checking this now. That would be central. If you if you want to know where that, if you're looking at these things square on with no perspective and you want to know where that is, it is of course simply the middle of this measurement here. So vertical line off there will give you the little pointy, the triangle at the top of that gable end. Now then, I sort of know what else goes on here, so I'm going to put this in from what I know from memory. So the house comes over here, another house here, and I won't make too much of this. We'll put a window in here. Just quickly mention, I'm going to put a window here and a window here, just to indicate with a like a lozenge shape. Yeah, just to mention something about our loose style. If you were commissioned to paint an image from a customer, if you ever were, sometimes it happens, doesn't it? So you wouldn't get away with making certain bits up. They would sort of come back to you and say, well, you know, sorry about this. Your painting doesn't really represent my house, or whatever it was they've asked you to commission to paint. Then yeah, you're going to have to work specifically and accurately from your photo reference or sketches, and just put up with the fact that it might not feel aesthetically pleasing to look at as a result. So this is, you know, the cliche when we say artistic license, and it's one reason why I don't do commissions unless somebody was to offer me a proper, you know, payment for a commission. I don't touch them, because for me it just kills any opportunity to inject the art into your work. It doesn't allow you to play with the artistic license. So anyway, right, where we started about the eyeline. Now my eyeline, remember I'm the photographer. I took this photo and I'm on a slope, and the slope goes upwards away from me. So my eyeline is probably about here. And it is a guess. You can only guess these things, folks. So there's my eyeline there, approximately. Why is that relevant? Because when you're dealing with different levels of grounds, hills, slopes, you need to have a sense of where your eyeline is. You also need to know, once you've established your eyeline, and I think the two go hand in hand. Once you've established your eyeline, in other words, my head would be about this, wouldn't it? Be about this big sort of thing here. Once you establish your eyeline, you get a better sense, a better idea for where the ground line is. That's where people's feet will be when you're placing your figures. And you'll see me sometimes just put horizontal marks, horizontal lines across my road. And that will help not only indicate that this is flat ground compared to what it's neighboring here, which is vertical shape. It'll help you in terms of where to put the feet of your figures. Now then, we're going to invent these figures. I'm going to have, not too far away from us, let's say they're about 15 yards up the slope, up the lane from us. So they're not going to be too small. We'll have them chatting. And I'll make a guess, and if it's wrong, I'll move it. So some fairly light pencil work to start off with. Here. Now, this is one of those occasions where I will probably put a little more emphasis on the legs, because these are people chatting. So if people are walking, if they're moving at all, you really want to sort of be careful not to overstate the legs. But in this case, as I say, these are two people having a morning chat. So facing each other, you can actually see the legs. I wouldn't go as far as putting feet in. And remember that the head is always slightly, if the central axis, if that's the right word, if the central vertical through a figure, through the torso is about there, you'll notice that that line is at the back of the head. The head is a 4. It's forward of it, almost as though it's sitting on the chest a little bit. So it's always just in front. And don't overdo the size of those heads, folks. There's nothing more amateur looking than a figure with too large a head. I say this every time we tackle figures. You're much better off putting in what might appear to be too small a head than too big a head. It only has to go a millimeter or less too big, and it looks a bit crass. It just looks wrong. So there we are. I'm going to give this chap here a dog companion, and watch how I do the dog shape. It is just a triangle, okay, with a triangle for a head for the moment, tail up, and then I cut off the bottom point of the triangle, and I indicate. Dogs are always moving about, so you shouldn't worry too much about the legs of the dog. The front legs, though, if you do put them in, are nearly always vertically straight like this, whereas the back leg, there's a little more to the haunch there, and they're often sort of cranked back and then angled forward like that. But as I say, be careful not to overdraw the dog. Rely on just a nice loose brush mark for the most part for the dog. Okay, I think we're ready to go here. So I'll just sort of voice my concerns. There are always some concerns before you start a painting. Some more than other paintings. But my concern with this is I want to make this area here, so it's the top of the road and the top part of the figures, to be specific, to be absolutely specific. The shoulders, the heads, and the top part of the lane is my focal point territory. But look at what you've got competing for that over here on the right-hand side. It's okay to have a sub-focal point, a secondary focal point that's not quite as important, doesn't have the same impact, but you've got to be very careful that this information over here, everybody wants to look at a house with windows. You've got to play this down somehow. So that's my concern. You'll probably, when we get there, you'll probably see me just putting blanket washes over these buildings, have them in mostly silhouette. The photo doesn't do that. The photo illuminates them because there's sunlight coming from the left-hand side, which shows them off considerably.
Could you be putting a tree there?
You could substitute. Yeah, absolutely. Is that Martin?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. Why not? I mean, I would fully encourage that, particularly if you're not inclined to want to paint buildings in the first place. You could put a tree in here.
Yeah.
And I'll perhaps do that for your benefit, for our benefit now. Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea, Martin. So I could have both still. I could just play off, I could put my buildings in with washes, flat washes, so they're not too interesting. And then we can sort of, while the paper's still damp, I'll, with a largish pointed brush, we'll put some trees across there. And between the trees, as long as the tree is not painted on dry paper, as long as it has a softness to it, because the tree itself could be an eye catch, could be a distraction. So whatever you do over here needs to be painted, if you can, wet into wet, or at least wet into damp. Okay, so you don't want too many hard edges. Hard edges, imagine hard edges around these windows. Hard edges attract the eye. Soft edges don't attract the eye quite as much. So, again, you've heard me probably say this many times, folks. Focal point territory, you're going to find your lightest lights and your darkest darks sat side by side. You're going to find a majority of your hard brush marks, your hard lines and edges in the focal point territory. But as you move out from that point, things get softer. Edges get softer, tones get a little bit closer to each other. There's not as much in terms of contrast. So I think enough said. I'm going to make a start. So, sorry, before I forget, there's our eyeline, my eyeline as I took the photo. It's not the same eyeline as our two figures, okay? And do you know why that is? It's because we're not dealing with flat ground. It's only on flat ground that we have the same eyeline, where every figure shares the same eyeline. No matter where they are in your scene, if it's flat ground, then you know, like shopping malls, whatever, everybody shares the same eyeline. But this is a ground that goes upwards. It's a gradient that goes up away from us. So their eyeline is not the same as ours. But you should always think, you should always establish the scene by, you should always start the scene by establishing your eyeline. You are the viewer. You always look at your paintings from the viewer's eyes. Okay, right. I'm going to start with, I know I had specific brushes, but like a 1-inch flat. So I'll use the 1-inch flat. But to be honest, I flip these days between 1-inch flats and mops. I'll show you them both here. That's the one I think I've put on the list. It's a 1-inch flat, or very close to 3/4 this might be, because I've come down size a bit. But I should really use a 1-inch. I believe in using as big a brush as possible whenever possible. Or if I don't use the 1-inch flat, I use a large mop, and sometimes the mop size I use is that. Unfortunately, folks, I can't tell you what these mop sizes are because the information has come off the handles long ago. I do know this. Mops are unique in the fact that they don't calibrate the sizes the same as they do traditional brushes. Whereas, you know, this is a traditional round brush like this is a size 4. If I had a mop brush this size, it would be it would be something like a 00 or something like that. So just be aware of, if you're ordering mop brushes and you think, oh, well, I'll get one the same size as my round brush, you'll get something probably a lot smaller or a lot bigger. I'm not sure which way it goes. Most suppliers will give you the dimensions before you buy, so be careful. Right. Let's put those brushes back for a moment, and I'll start with the 1-inch flat. I'm just going in with a bit of ultramarine blue here for the sky. Pretty weak. It's not so much about, notice I go over the buildings, and this is part of what I've been talking about. I don't want to sort of treat the buildings like they're very precious. So put your sky wash over them. And because the hedge itself will be warm greens, so, you know, sort of greeny yellows with some burnt sienna in, it's okay to put blue in, because blue, of course, is part of the component of green. So you can go over those. And I think it's a good idea to do this right-hand side now because of the issues I mentioned. So the buildings, I'll put a little alizarin crimson in here to cool them off. So you'll see this paint drift into the sky a little bit in places. Now I will give them a bit of warmth. This is a little bit of raw sienna I've just picked up here. And as I say, if you work quickly, wet in wet like this, you should be able to play down the shapes over here. Let's probably a bit too warm, so it's okay. I'll go back to the blue, to the ultramarine blue, and it will become a little muddy. Again, muddy colors don't attract the eye as much as the cleaner colors do. So a little bit of mud in this area shouldn't do us much harm. I've just noticed at the top of my lane here, I've got this, oops, and that will become a cauliflower if I'm not careful. Interestingly enough, I've got cauliflowering edge up there. I'm not worried about that at all. It looks like high cloud, but I didn't want it there. If I had not spotted that and it had developed into a cauliflower, then I'd have probably fed it with a neutral bluey green, and then it would have just looked like there was a hedgerow at the top going across the road on the opposite side of the top of the lane. Okay, so the only place I haven't painted really is over here. So I'm just making sure this area, I mean, I will put some detail into here, but not much. Now, I think we ought to deal with the hedgerow. Down here, where the hedgerow is nearest to us, I'll use a much warmer color. In fact, I shall add burnt sienna and green, and the phthalo green or the viridian if that's what you're using. So don't be mean with paint, folks. This is why tube paints are so important. They are essential. You can't, you know, to avoid messy looking paintings, you've got to use a lot of paint and a lot of water. Otherwise, you'll see a lot of dry brushwork appearing. The dry brushwork comes from not being able to pick up enough rich paint quickly enough. So I'm cooling the color off. I'll just recap a little bit, though you can pick this up on the video when you watch it. Just recap. I've turned this into a hedge because I'm saying, you know, this is vegetation. This is a hedge made of various species of plants. And so I've dominated with a green. Having said that, I also put in quite a bit of burnt sienna to warm the green up, particularly down here where things are closer. Just remember that as things get closer, of course, they get warmer. And as they move up the road up here, they get paler and they get cooler. And I just said paler because I'm telling myself something. This is too dark up here. It's a little cooler than down here, but it's too dark. So I'm just going to, this is a thirsty brush now. I've just squeezed all the water out of it, and I'm just lifting some of the paint out. And that has a fantastic way of giving recession, of giving distance to this hedgerow. As you go up the hill, it gets paler and a bit cooler. To about here, I suppose. And then you might just get the odd little bit of light down here, but I would prefer to warm that little bit of light up with some warm paint too. So there we are. Now I'm going to treat the left-hand side of the road in much the same way, but I will sort of indicate perhaps that there is light coming across. So it would make sense that if once we've got this color established in this side of the road, I will use a purple mix, a ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, just to suggest that it's more in the shade than this side of the road. So just repeating what I did over here. A warm green, that's phthalo green or viridian and burnt sienna.
Phthalo green and
burnt sienna. So I'm just making sure, as I say, there's a bit of warmth down here. So plenty of burnt sienna and raw sienna into this. So I'm just reminding myself that there's some flat ground in front of this hedgerow. Sorry, raw sienna and burnt sienna down here. But as we move up again in a moment, you'll see me add a little more water and a little more blue. But if I say blue, I mean the listed blue, ultramarine blue. So now then, I think I want to use this to carve around the back of the toe of this figure here, so it'll show him up a bit better. Now there was a excuse me. There is hawthorn, or a variety of bushes up here. There's also one back here, and I'm going to push. If you look carefully, there's one hiding behind the telegraph post. I don't like that. That's an awkward coincidence. So I'm going to push my little tree that's up there right up to the side there, and maybe a smaller one down here somewhere like this. So when you apply these two little shapes, you should really be thinking about the slope up there, not just put them in random willy-nilly without much thought. There is so the base will indicate there's a little bit of a slope between them there. Okay, now then, one thing I can do over here, and these ideas are now honestly just coming to me as I paint. They've only just arrived in the brain, as it were, fresh into the brain. Though this isn't what the photo says, I'm going to suggest that there is something growing just inside this area that will have that will offer some blurring, some softness to this area over here. There is actually in the real world there are plants growing over here, but they're not as far up the road as I'm suggesting. But what I'm doing is I'm using it to make my painting work. So I'm bringing them in. So there we are. I'm going to speed dry this, folks, for a moment. So have a look at that shape I made for the hedgerow there. It's obvious rather that the sky was still damp up here. The area of sky, the blue area, was still damp. And that just came off my fingertip. So that has softened nicely. I quite like that, because if you look at the photo, you can see that there are branches popping up, very soft shapes. And I'm just making some fine adjustments so it doesn't look like the end of the world as you get to the top of the road there. Just suggesting that there is a little bit of something green at the top of that road. And that connects things quite nicely. Just a gentle hint of a hedgerow on the opposite side of the road up there. All right. Okay, I've got an unpainted area of my paper here. Don't think it matters too much, but I'm just going to run the brush through there. Sorry, right. I'm going to speed dry this and just take the opportunity to come over to you guys for a 2-minute, 3-minute chat to make sure everybody's okay. By that time, this will be dry. Let me just grab the hairdryer. So the wash is next. So I will be bearing in mind what has been mentioned to me today, folks, about mixing washes. Let me just show you. I don't know whether this will help. I'll need to think this one out before I make a video on it, but it'll be along these lines. I'll show you the palette. I'm not sure how well my my camera tracks the movement because it's an autofocus camera, but hopefully it'll be okay. So that's ultramarine blue. There's some muck, dried out muck on this palette, which doesn't bother me in the slightest. There's not enough paint there for it to really take this color away from where I want it to be. So it's whenever you put other colors like these dried out bits of orange and stuff into ultramarine blue, you get a sort of indigo color. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to that to make it go a plummy sort of purple. And I'm going to take this some orangey colors here. I'll bring that in as well. This is the color for my road, okay? You can see what I mean about surface area and how big that wash is. It allows you to see the color, whereas if it was in a tiny little corner here, it would just be a puddle and you'd be hard pushed to define whether that color, it might be dark, but is it going cool or is it going warm? Whereas on a big surface, you can see not only the strength of the paint, but the bias it's taking, cool or warm. Right, so I've got to be careful to paint around my figures here. I'll start at the top, and this might be a little bit too dark for the top of the road. Don't mind going over the legs because they can be painted in and over the dog too much. Reload. Now then, here's my mix again, okay? I haven't changed it yet, but I'm going to. So let's take this horizontally, as this is flat ground. Now, before I go, what I'm going to do very quickly is, this is why I work so quickly. That's got to be caught now with some warmer color because it's the foreground. If I don't paint it this quickly, I'll have horrible, unsightly looking brush marks there. Now at the top, equally as quickly, clean this brush off. I have to put this palette down because I need both hands. I'm rinsing this brush and I'm going to take some of the paint out of the top of the road because it will be paler up there, just as we did with the hedge itself, the hedgerow, if you remember. Okay. Now, what else can I do to this road before it dries? I can take a round brush, any old round brush, and I'm going to imply some track lines. This is a thirsty brush. It's not dry brush. I've dunked it in the water. I've rinsed it out of water, and so I'm making a single line mark. I've had to stop where the figures are, but we really, if we can, try to get that line to go up the road beyond them as well. Take a bit more out just about here on the existing line, and we'll have a partial line taken out about here. I think that's okay. That gives us a nice suggestion of movement up here. It's funny, in my photo, it was very frosty this particular morning. And if I were to take line, as I've just done off the side there, you get that sort of like frost on grass effect. Anyway, I think that'll suffice for the road. I've got the field over here, which is neither here nor there. I'll put almost anything in that. I'm going to use a bit of raw sienna and a bit of ultramarine blue probably. So whenever I make a mix, my question is always the same. Is it warm or is it cool? Either way, you'll always use two colors. So if I make the decision this field is going to be warm, I don't just put burnt sienna in there because burnt sienna is a warm color. I say I'm going to put burnt sienna in there, but it's got to be leveled off with a bit of cool. So if I decided the field was cool, I would start with blue and put a bit of warm in it. So I'm starting with warm. Now I've got posts here, so I've got to remember to paint round them as I want those nice and light to stand out. So here's my warm, which is really just burnt sienna. Painting around my posts. And now let's put a little bit of blue into that while it's still wet. Rinsing my brush very quickly, picking up a bit of picking up a bit of ultramarine blue, because this is the warm. This is the little bit of warm that's necessary. And I'll just touch down. I'm not painting it per se. I'm touching down this blue. I've just rinsed out this 1-inch brush again. I've just in my water tub, rinsing it out of water. And just like the top of the road, I'm lifting some light out. As this field goes up the hill there, it gets paler as it gets a bit more light on it. Now we can start. This is, I suppose, the area now where, as Chris and I were just talking about, the process and how much time you spend on each area of the painting. I used to do this thing. I do the 3-stage demonstration. I think I ought to bring that back for a demonstration soon. I sort of see where we are here, and I would say this is stages 1 and 2. Nailed, done, in the bag. So we're moving into stage 3 here, and this is where I will slow down a little bit. But I can slow down because there's not as much to do. It's surprising from this stage, as lucid as it looks at this stage, it takes a relatively quite a small amount of work and detail just to make this painting look finished. So let's pick up a small round brush. This is a size 4. It doesn't matter. I've got a size 6 here somewhere. I'd be just as happy using a size 6. The criteria is it must have a good point. Old brushes, worn out brushes are no good for this. So if you haven't already, treat yourself to a new brush that's got a good point to it. They don't last forever. I don't buy, I've got very few expensive brushes. I don't buy sable, though I have got a couple. I've bought a few in the past. They don't last that long, even the really expensive ones. So I'd rather buy synthetic every time. Okay, I have blends. I quite like the blend, which is some percentage of natural fiber and some percentage of synthetic fiber. Right, okay. Now then, is this dry? Can I put my hand on it, or am I going to leave a mark? No, I think it's dry. Now, just going to fire a few shots at the edge of the road here, and that's dark, but it's a bit cold. That means I put plenty of blue in this, but I didn't put much of the burnt sienna in. So the colors that I'm using for this dark are ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I want this dark to be a little warmer. What are these? They're just little dark indication of areas of pockets of shadow, I suppose. As I say, some point I will darken shadow this side of the road. I'm going around my figure here. When you get to about the figure, you really shouldn't be using this dark mix that you're using in the foreground, because it won't appear as dark back there. If you do anything up there at all, it's the same mix as I just used, but it'll just have a lot of water added to it. So just come back down this side. Sometimes it's good because there's a bit of grass here, as I know, just to do some horizontal small brush marks. But remember what I said earlier, I drew pencil lines vertically on this hedge, which helps me remember, if you like, that this is somewhat sort of vertical growing object. So I'll do some dry brush marks up on the face of this hedge. So not too many. It's dry brush, remember. That means there's very, very little water in this. Should we do anything over the top? Remember that the hedge will sort of flatten off over the top. So, this is how we indicate the change of angles I came up here vertically on the side. When I got to the top, where I've got a slightly paler area, I just put some more horizontal brush marks across it, only smallish sort of indications. I'm not going to do too much over here because I do see it as being shadowed off in a moment. Put a little bit of dark around the base of the posts, just drying off a little bit of wet paint there. Can the person please mute themselves? That can you check that you've got that little red microphone? Mute all current participants. Yeah. So I've clicked my end here, folks, where it's saying mute all, and I've done that, but I can still hear. If you haven't got a little red microphone symbol in the bottom of your screen, it means that you're not muted. Thank you. So, as I say, things get a little bigger. The little marks, the incidental marks that I'm making here get bigger, warmer, thicker of paint, stronger of paint, richer mixes. And perhaps we could just run a little bit of a dry, broken line at the edge of that road again, down here. And even a dry brush line through the road itself somewhere. I don't know, about here, somewhere like that. Okay, let's move to the buildings. And I'm just going to copy my pencil work, really. And if you notice then, because I'm not working damp into damp, which is what I prefer to do to keep these shapes soft looking, I'm putting the paint on and almost taking them off immediately with a tissue. I've got a couple of windows here. I'll do the same with those. And if this were, by the end of the painting, it'd be something I'll be checking in a moment, but if this were to look too interesting over here, I'd simply take well, I'll show you when I get there. I'll diffuse it with a brush, a flat brush, a damp flat brush. So up the side of here, I really don't want to be putting in much more here. Okay, yeah, right. Let's put in the telegraph posts. If you can, do these with a single shot. I don't have the steadiest of hands these days, but it doesn't, you know, the perfect line doesn't make for a great looking telegraph post. Bit of a mistake here on my part. Okay, it's because I was talking about something else at the time, but I've put my telegraph post is coming out of the ground almost in the same place as my fence post, but I think I might get away with it because the fence post is white or pale color and the lamppost telegraph post is dark. I have another couple of posts further up, so I chuck a load of water into this mix to make them weaker, even though they won't look weaker at this point because they just look dark while they're wet, but these will dry out. Oops, that's too thick. Yeah. Oh, that's something I feel really important to mention, folks. When you're putting in telegraph posts and cables, sometimes I'm getting a few paintings back and the cables on the telegraph posts are thicker than the posts themselves. I know how difficult that is, but it does require some finesse. If you struggle getting a really thin line off a rigger brush, then use just use pencil or a pen, a fine liner pen to put your cables in. Yeah, because it looks a little strange, let's say, if the cables are thicker than the posts. Right. So I'm just going to put a little bit of dark on the right-hand side of some of these posts that are popping up out the hedgerow. Just break them up a little bit, break their shapes up a little bit. Let's do the figures. I'll put this tree in after I've done something else with the houses. So I'm going to give my figures a watery blue. The one on the left, cover if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm delivering quite a rich mix of paint to the central area. In other words, I'm not pushing, when I first deliver the paint, I'm not pushing that paint around up to the edges of the figure. I just let it sit in the middle of the figure. Then I decide how I want to shape my figure. So here I go, I'm shaping the figure now. There's no more paint in this brush. It's what I've delivered, like a little reservoir into the general area. So there, I think that's a reasonable shape for a body with a jacket on it. But I'll just put a little bit of burnt sienna in the lower right-hand side to suggest some form. Now here come the legs, and I'd like this to be a slightly drier mix. A single brush mark, a slight bend in the leg. You can do it again as long as the second one is also, the second brush stroke is also a single brush stroke. What you want to avoid is just going back and forth with the tip of the brush up and down the leg. So let's make the other chap a nice bright red. So it might not be on the list, folks. I apologize for that. Just pick up a bit of cadmium red and do the same. Deliver the paint into the middle area, just the middle of that figure's body, okay? And then I clean the brush of paint, and then I move. There's always a little sort of collar, maybe even a hood back there. Change the color slightly for the legs, just make it darker with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And again, let's do a single brush stroke for that leg, okay? There. And I don't even have to go back into that one. I'm quite happy with a single brush stroke on that one. Now the heads, I'm going to make them a warm red, so like a burnt sienna. As I say, if you haven't got cadmium red, I've just used a bit of cadmium red in that jacket, in that figure. If you haven't got cadmium red, just use a bit of burnt sienna and alizarin crimson. You'll get a very, very similar color. Now I'm just placing the faces, the heads in with a warm color. Again, a little circular shape in front of the shoulders. That should suffice. The dog is a sort of warm, dark browny color. So ultramarine blue with probably a bit more burnt sienna than there is ultramarine blue. Let's do a triangle shape for the head, like that, just a push down of the brush point. I'll concentrate on the back of the dog here. Plenty of water and plenty of paint. Plenty of water, plenty of paint. Could put it, if you really, really want to push your luck, try see if you can get an ear or a pair of ears, just one tiny little nick of the point of the brush. The tail of the dog, no way am I going to bother putting in a brush stroke for that. I'm just going to take my either fingernail. I have this, I think it's like a dentist tool, but you could use a stick. In fact, what am I doing? I'm just messing about. Why don't I just use the handle of the brush and I'll just pull the tail out, because there's plenty of water there on the on near the dog's bottom. There's plenty of paint and water there, and I just use the handle of the brush to pull the tail out. You could do the same with the legs, actually. So just get some part of the lower body in on the dog, and then with the handle of the brush, actually I will use this because this particular handle of the brush is a bit nubby, it's a bit blunt. So I'll just pull a hint of a leg, back leg down there, and I won't put too much of a front leg on there. Okay, Now I'm just going to give them all a shadow, ultramarine blue, little bit of alizarin crimson, little bit of burnt sienna. Under the dog first, perhaps from the front leg back that way. By the way, folks, from last week's painting session, those that you have sent me some images, your shadows are really coming on. I really pleasantly surprised. We seem to be not shying away from shadows like we used to, and they look great. There's some superbly convincing looking shadows. Okay, so I'm just making sure they look okay. Now I am going to I'm going to put in one last wash here, and this is going to be over my buildings and over my hedgerow, and possibly the odd one across the road. So ultramarine blue. Here I go again. I'm going to use this big space here, the lid. I only really use this lid for the really big washes. These smaller wells are okay for smaller washes. So there's the ultramarine blue. Here's some alizarin crimson, which I always put in. This is a go-to shadow mix for me. It is something like, I hasten to add, 70% ultramarine blue. It is 3 to 5% alizarin crimson because it's so strong. And then the remaining percent, whatever that is, 25%, is burnt sienna, just to warm it up. So make sure I've got the strength right. It can be too strong sometimes. Fully load my flat brush, and because it's at its strongest when it's first mixed like this, I'm going to work in the foreground here, and it's study the photo. If rather than when you come to do your shadows, I'm doing now, study your photo. It'll give you a better idea than how I'm reading this. You know, as I mentioned in my quite a lot, I mentioned in my packs, like the drawing, things like this have got to make sense to you. Copying mine won't necessarily work on your painting. I'm just going to go up the road a bit there with the same mix, but with a bit more water in it. So make sure that's covered up here, something like that. Let's go across the road from these hedges, these bushes that are growing up there. And then we really, I know it's going to look much better if I do what I'm about to do next. And that is have some weight to the bottom area of this painting. So the weight being the shadow falling over the road. With as fewer brush strokes as possible. So yes, I do, folks, paint rapidly for the stages 1 and 2, but things do slow down here at this stage. Just going to go a little bit more into the edge here. And I think I'll use a little bit of white gouache around some of these figures just to pop them back out. I think there's a little bit of, so you can, by what I'm saying, I hope you can see how I'm reading things. I'm talking myself through what I think needs to be done. I think this shadow will probably fall from here. There's the form shadow on the left-hand side and the car shadow on the right-hand side. Soften it off a bit because it's on foliage. And then this might seem a bit strange, but it's my way of playing the buildings down and giving them solidity at the same time. I get that off there. So here's the shadow. See, by doing this, by creating the shadow on the buildings, I can pop the hedge. The top of my hedge here is quite a pale color. Sat against these shadowed buildings creates a nice negative shape. You have a little fillet of light there at the end of this building, at the edge of that building rather. I think I'm going to play with a bit of color in here, just so it doesn't look quite as flat. A little bit of red, burnt sienna in this nearer building just there. And now I'll lift some out because of the, potentially those buildings are looking a bit flat. This is where it gets really push-pull, fine-tuning. I don't want them to pop out too much, but at the same time, they can't look too flat. So I'm lifting some paint off where I think the windows are. I could lift out a little bit of paint strength from this right-hand side of this building. As some sort of reflected light is managing to bully its way through the shadowy areas. Even into this window here, bit of, it's glass. So even in shadow, you'd expect the panes of glass in the window to be a little lighter in the wall. A lot of what we paint and the answers lie within simple common sense and logic. Always be thinking, what are you painting? What is it you're trying to put across here? Right, just picking up those, and I'm about to finish this, folks, with a few branches for the tree on the right-hand side, and then the telegraph cables, which, as I say, if you're not confident in doing those cables, use a pen or a pencil, put them back in, pencil them in like this, down the road, cross to that one there. They should have, of course, like all telegraph posts do, they have these brackets, don't they, for supporting the cables. So just this one's out of sight, it's too high, it'd be up out of sight. But you can show these little connection brackets that hold on to the cables just by a little dot either side of the telegraph post. Right, as I say, talking away here, and I'm thinking, are the edges of these shadows, particularly that one there for some reason, is it too hard? Should a little stretch of that edge be softened slightly? So I'm going to just pinch it off with a tissue there, so it's not quite as. Yeah, I think that's better. It's funny, I can't tell you what the logic was behind that decision. It was just an aesthetic. It was just the eye picking up on something, thinking, I think that could be improved on or changed. It's wrong, and I'm looking at that now. There, tissue is great, invest in tissue. It can be your best friend towards the end of the painting. Right. Just for speed's sake, I have a rigger brush, which I've put on the list, which you can use. But I've got a sword liner brush here because it'll do the tree much quicker. The tree on the right-hand side, that is. Ultramarine blue for the tree, sorry, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, my usual go-to mix. And it has a bias, if it has a bias at all, it's towards the burnt sienna. So there's a little bit more burnt sienna in there. But this is what I meant earlier about if you paint now over the still wet buildings, okay, there won't be too much hard edge here to catch the eye. The only hard area is where I am now because the sky is dry. But as long as I don't go too mad with too much detail on this tree here, you should be okay. Shouldn't be too much of an eye catch here. I still look here, and I'll try and do something in a moment that emphasizes this area further still. Even if I've got to go a little bit darker up the top of the road, wherever it takes to pop the focal point out, I will do. Okay, I'm getting a bit carried away there. So telegraph wires takes a little bit of concentration and steady of hand this. As I say, only if you're not using pen or pencil for your, if this is how to do it, if you're using a rigger brush or a sword liner as I am here, you go in, you hold the brush between, well, this is how I do it, I should say. I hold the brush like this between the first two fingers, the index and the middle finger, and I keep it secure with my thumb. But really, what I feel in my hand is that this finger here is an extension of the brush itself, or the brush is an extension of this finger, whichever way you want to look at it. And then you keep everything locked up in your arm. I can't do this sat down. I know I can't do this sat down. So if you're unable to stand up to paint, folks, you're better off sticking to the pencil lines and the pen lines. But here we go. So stood up, I hover over the area that I intend to land the tip of the brush, and all it's moving is my fingertips. And just all that's moving is that, the fingers themselves. Everything else is locked up, my wrist, my elbow, my shoulder. And once I know I'm close to the paper surface, I just make a line. Now, it is tricky, that, and I'll tell you why. Because watercolor paper, unless you pre-stretch your paper, watercolor paper buckles. So you're trying to travel across a surface that should be flat and not have to go with the undulations of a warped paper. So just bear that in mind too, okay? If you put too much water in this too, you'll have a horrible heavy line. So this is teetering towards a dry brush mix. And it's funny, it's like everything else. Once you've done it a few times, you develop your confidence. I don't hover over it for ages. I just say, right, I'm there, time to go. Off you go, in it goes, in goes the line. Perhaps one goes over to there, to another building. And I'll just finish this off with a bit of white gouache. There's probably a couple of things on this painting that I might tomorrow sort of say, well, you know, needs a bit of this, needs a bit of that there. For instance, you know, I could spend a bit more time on putting some form shape in here, particularly down the nearer side of the hedge. And this is scumbling. You probably can't hear it, but this is the belly of the brush. And you can hear it scumbling over the surface. A little bit more burnt sienna, perhaps a little bit of raw sienna. Almost no water in this brush now. A little bit of warmth on top here on the same side. Well, the opposite side, same distance up. And a bit of white gouache. And then we'll put the mount around it and see what it looks like. I'm cleaning this little brush off. I'm going to move my palette out the way because it's done its job. And at the moment I'm using designer gouache, Dale Rowney, but there's my box of white. They come in all sorts, as long as it's not acrylic paint, of course. SAA opaque white, Winsor & Newton designer gouache, Winsor & Newton Chinese white, as long as it's white and it's watercolor. But I do favor the gouache because it's slightly more intense white certainly more intense white, I think, than the Chinese watercolor Chinese white. So I'm just putting a bit on the tip of the brush there. As I say, again, this is why good quality brushes with points on them are essential. And I'm just going to highlight the back that I've lost of this figure a little bit. Really just a quick dry white mark around the figure. Careful not to do too much because you'll just give them a sort of like a strange halo, white halo. A little bit there. Other than that, maybe the dog, tip of the tail or part of the tail. I've got an unfortunate bit of white paper that I've overlooked there, and that's just me sort of, you know, these are the this is the downfall of painting quickly. But I can live with that. I'd rather have that than the whole painting looking terribly dry. So I just picked up a little bit of that purpley mix that I used for the shadow and filled that bit of awkward white paper in. Don't mind the white paper in other areas here, but it was over the top of the dog, and it just looked like the dog, poor thing, was wearing some strange garment to appease the owner or something. Right, and then finally, this is what I like doing. I always do this. I just feel it as though it adds a bit of sparkle. Just tapping a little bit of white. Tis a bit, I mean, you know, tis what I do. It's not what every watercolorist does. But I'm going to call it a day there, folks. I think it's okay. I always say this too. I'm never evaluating my painting as I'm working. Never. I don't think, is it good? Is it bad? Indifferent? I just paint, you know, just enjoy painting. It's afterwards, now that I think, oh, I better check to see if it's any good. I think if with every brushstroke you're checking and you're thinking, was that good? Was that bad? Was that lousy? Therein lies part of the problem, part of your problem. You know, it doesn't matter. Remember, if you start thinking like that, you can just say, well, I'll paint another one, but don't think about it while you're painting if you can. Sorry, I'm just going to get my mount, and then I'll put the mount around that and I'll come back to you. So here we are. We're about there, I think. And I'll pan out. There we are.